Let's start with the fact that Duke has taken a loss in league play. John Shire talked about the fact that they didn't defend well. Does it come down to basically that at Clemson?
Yeah, I think you could boil it down to just that. I mean, it's also like if Cooper doesn't slip on the
right.
on the next play, but certainly like everyone's talking about the play where Cooper fell, the last 2 days, but in the possession before that, Chase Hunter gets Cooper Flagg on a switch and drives by him and scores,
Right.
So I do think, like for Duke this season, the defense has been the sort of fail-safe, the thing that you could fall back on, but Clemson's a really good team. I mean, it's a hostile environment, and you've got a team in Clemson, one of the, a team that can kind of match Duke in terms of size and kind of have like a strength advantage, on the inside with two, older guys with Locken and Shefflin against Flagg and Malawach and Brown, but also one of the oldest teams in the country, in Clemson. I mean, experience across the board. And so, yeah, I would tend to agree with John Shire on that. Like, it is a lot of it's about defense. Because even if you look at the offense, like a lot of guys had like individual good games. Proctor, Knipple. I actually would have liked to have seen a little bit more of Kahn down the stretch, to be honest with you, like operating on the ball, just because it was a lot of Cooper, and he had played big minutes and had already used a lot of possessions, and Clemson's keying on him. So maybe you would have liked to have seen like a little bit more Kahn, but yeah, ultimately, I don't even think that loss is like the end of the world for Duke,
No.
because then they don't have to continue with the undefeated in conference play talking point, and if you're looking for a motivational tactic type deal, later in the season with them, this is, for lack of a better term, like a wake up call. You know what I mean? And they may see Clemson again, a few weeks from now at the ACC tournament too.
Brian Geisinger is joining us here at bguys_Bert on Twitter. But I also follow him on Blue Sky at Brian Geisinger. All right, here's the thing about the Blue Devils, and I don't want to belabor this point because I want to move on to the other two teams. In the two games before the Carolina game, in my opinion, they were poor, not poor defensively, but they were nothing better than okay defensively. I thought they allowed NC State to get to a lot of spots on the floor that they normally wouldn't allow. And guys like Trey Parker had big games, and he was not the only one. Dontrez Styles had a big game. And by the way, both of those guys played very well at Stanford in a very, very close loss. But I thought Duke had some trouble stopping the ball. And the game at Wake was a similar game for me, that it was one in which Duke had some trouble stopping the ball at times. And I thought that was the same thing. And maybe that's their Achilles heel at times, is that you will be able to beat them off the dribble and force their defense to react, which creates opportunities. All you got to do then is knock down the shots. But I thought their defense in those two games wasn't great. That's why I thought I gave North Carolina a chance to make that a game, until we realized that Duke wasn't going to do that against UNC. So that's where I think that John Shire is maybe even more right, in that their offense is fine and it can be great, but it's really all about them getting stops, and they just couldn't get enough of them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth pointing out those two games you had mentioned before UNC. I mean, no Malik Brown, right? Who returns to that UNC game, and he really helps out with their defensive versatility. He is also a guy that helps keep the ball in front because he can switch. So, but it's also worth mentioning, the State, Wake, and now Clemson games are all games that we saw Duke, at least for a few possessions, go to its 2-3 zone, right? In part because of sort of like what you're highlighting. I kind of wish my thing too would have been, earlier on in the game with Kaman Malawach in at 5. Like I understand why Duke decides to hedge ball screens and have him, hard hedge or play up or around the level. But I kind of like him more when he's sitting back in the paint. And then they're keeping the ball in front that way too. And I kind of thought I thought in the second half their defense actually had some good stretches when they went to Malawatch and drop coverage or were using Brown in the switch. But, of course, Clemson is a tough team to switch against because, one, they've got a guard in Chase Hunter that can be, your 4s and 5s off the dribble, but they've also got 2 big guys with Shefflin and Locken that can also score in the paint and handle and are, good post-to-post passers. So it was a tough matchup, I would say, for Duke, personnel-wise, along with just the fact that, as great as this Duke team is, that there certainly are, they're not impervious, and there are spots to pick at them.
Right.
But I would say ultimately Brown as a switch defender is supposed to be the cure-all for keeping the ball in front and out of the paint.
All right, let's get to NC State real quick. So, again, more impressed with them at Stanford, who I think is a better team than Cal.
Definitely.
The Trey Parker shot, especially the way they rallied late. The Trey Parker shot, it's halfway down, and it comes out. And while this is not why they lost, he was definitely fouled after the shot, wasn't he?
Yeah, it seemed like it. It's tough.
I don't understand.
In a season of tough losses, this one felt like the closest, a 1-point game, and who knows if Ismael Diop makes a couple of free throws down the stretch,
right,
that moves it. But for NC State to go on the road, I know Jalen Blakes wasn't playing for Stanford, and that takes that they're missing their best on-ball creator and the guy that really unlocks their pick and pop game with Maxime Reynaud. But for State to go on the road, no Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, Ben Middlebrooks plays 13 minutes, right? Fouls out. So they're playing with their third-string center, and to almost pull it off, it was tough, man. I thought they really battled. Styles had an amazing game. I thought Marcus Hill, who's been pretty steady for them for most of the season, he was great. Trey Parker, breakout game. He's played well the last few weeks, but this felt obviously he hit some crazy shots, but I thought Trey's playmaking and decision-making in the pick and roll against Stanford's drop coverage or when they were playing that matchup zone at times, I thought Trey did a really nice job. That to me was interesting because with his speed and athletic pop and the shot making is legit too, State really might have something with him, not just this season, but potentially into next year. So frustrating loss. And I got to say, the Louisville Cardinals in that 3-point, shooting, arsenal is not exactly a welcome home present after a long, challenging, frustrating West Coast swing.
Yeah, 100%. Louisville, though, has shown some warts lately.
Definitely.
The loss at Georgia Tech notwithstanding, but they have, that's part of it. So sorry, I don't know why I said notwithstanding, but that game is an example of what what Louisville can do or cannot do. But I want to talk. Sorry, it's weird. I want to real quick get into this is where I was after the Duke game, and I was in the same place after the win over Notre Dame, and I look at this team and I think, man, they could be good. Not good at near the top of the league. But considering when you go from the 6th team down, there's no reason why they're not as good or better than any of those teams based on some of their personnel. So if we could get Styles, Hill, Parker, Jaden Taylor, Dennis Parker Jr., who had a good first half, if you could get some of these other guys, if you get all these guys playing consistently well at the same time, they have the opportunity. I think there are the pieces there to not be 2-10 and
Definitely.
to make the ACC tournament, which is why this is such a big week. I'm not going to rule out Louisville. I'm not ruling out that they can't win that game, but they've got to win the next one if they don't win this one.
Yeah. No, Gold, I think we've talked about it this season. State's issue, everyone in their rotation's good, right? It's nothing but ACC rotation players. I don't think there's necessarily an overall bad position. I think they're pretty strong in a few different spots. I will say if they had this version of Trey Parker all season,
right,
we'd also be talking a different tune because like he's what they need more of. This sort of like scoring, playmaking pop on the basketball, and just like what that does for their half court offense. I'm a big Michael O'Connell fan. Believer. Liked him at Stanford.
right,
True believer. And he hit the shot, and he was a superhero for them down the stretch during the run last year. But he's having a tough season, and that was a tough game, at Stanford over the weekend. And so just with your starting point guard and your starting center in Middlebrooks to get, that little, that's tough. They need more scoring. Pop Styles has been consistent. Hill has been too. But a guy like Parker who can run pick and roll and shoot off the dribble from multiple levels of the court, that is something that they've been starved for all season. So, we'll see how he plays down the stretch. We'll see where the shot making, how and, when that stabilizes. We'll see what that looks like because he's hit some tough shots, maybe, maybe ones that are a little above his pay grade, but we'll see. But yeah, this is a huge week. And, against Louisville, you're talk about two teams that are at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of 3-point volume. You know what I mean?
right.
And so State is really going to have to take care of the ball, get on the glass. I mean, they've just got, and then they've got to do everything they can to contain the Chucky Hepburn, Rain Smith, James Scott trio, because Smith is the best shooter in the league this season, and Hepburn and Scott. I mean, if that's not the best pick and roll combo, it's a top 3 or 4 one in the league. Hepburn's been pretty outstanding this season, so it's a lot to deal with Pat Kelsey's club.
No question about it. All right, to North Carolina, who I called the win over Pitt kind of a rock fight, especially late.
Yes.
And look, North Carolina is going to have to grind. At least they got a win. It wasn't a quad 1 win; it was a quad 2 win. But they can get a quad 1 win tonight. Is the matchup conducive for them to get that?
I do worry a little bit about it with Clemson because you've got a gap defense with the Tigers, and that is a team that can give UNC and its guards some issues. I think you even saw that in the Pitt game where Pitt starts out switching like they did, a week or so ago against UNC, and the Tar Heels were doing pretty well against that. Davis was able to attack and get downhill, and then when Jeff Capel says, all right, enough of this, let's change up the scheme, they start, hedging and blitzing and showing on ball screens and getting in gaps, and all of a sudden that's where the rock fight came. UNC's offense, kind of went into the toilet there for a little bit. But they still did enough to pull it out, and as I've always said with UNC since November this season, if you have that kind of shot making, I know Ian Jackson's really struggling right now.
Yeah.
But if you get him going again, with now that Davis is looks like himself, really during ACC
a lot
play.
Closer to it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, he's in kind of a different role this season too, just because they're running. Elliot Cadeau is initiating so much offense for them. So. But I think Clemson's a tough matchup for them in that, in part to Clemson's size, man. Their size inside and the sort of their gap discipline defensively, it's a tough matchup for UNC, but I don't know, RJ Davis plus the, future NBA talent UNC has on this roster, it's not like they can't do it, but it's going to be a tough one, and they're going to need, a big performance here on a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah, and they need. I think Drake Powell's showing a lot of signs of
awesome.
Of really taking another step. And if you get Ian Jackson, kind of coming back, and you get Powell continuing to do what he's doing, and RJ Davis looks a lot closer to the RJ Davis, then I don't know. I think it's a difficult turnaround. I think it's a more difficult turnaround for Clemson than it is for Carolina. Even though Clemson is at home, because, man, coming off the emotions of beating Duke, good luck.
Hangover. Yeah. I mean, it's real. We've seen it.
Yep.
We've definitely seen it before. So, it will be fascinating. And, it does feel like the, home crowd has to play sort of a bit of a role tonight, too. But this Clemson team is legit. It really is.
I agree.
I give a lot of credit to Brad Brunell, who, I think has really done a nice job putting together offenses the last few seasons. I mean, this is one of the most no-nonsense teams you'll find. Like, no wasted motion. Everything that they do makes sense and connects together. And, I mean, they've got great individual talents on this team, too. But it's just a really impressive 2A team that does a lot of stuff well. And so you got to be on your game to beat them.
All right, I'm predicting a North Carolina win. I'm giving away one of my bets, and we place our bets. But I am predicting a North Carolina upset win on the road. And when they win this game tonight, they will be on the correct side of the bubble, and they will stay there unless they screw it up.
Yeah.
And I think they could screw it up because I think we know that there's a range for their performances. Brian Geisinger, 24/7 Sports, split the action on Substack. You should check it out. Our basketball brain, the basketball brain of this program. All right, man. Talk to you next week. Appreciate it.
Yeah, take care. Please subscribe, everyone.
Yes.
See you guys soon.
Please subscribe. Split the action.
Yeah.
We should
right.
do that.
It.
Thanks, man.